So a very warm welcome to Peter, who kindly has offered to give a talk on the role of moving into a development role and sort of where your expectations finish when you're doing a coding course versus the actual jobs that are there in the market. Peter has been with the STA for a few years now, I would say, joining in a former role when you were at Modular, I think, and has been instrumental to helping some of the teams just get their heads around how the nitty-gritty bits work, basically, and how projects come together. So thank you, Peter, for offering your time to do this as well.
No, you're very welcome. I should probably put these two slides in their opposite order, but we'll go with it anyway. So yeah, the idea of this is I do have a few slides, but I'd like it to be kind of relatively informal. It occurs to me that when you get out of whatever, whether it's a course, a degree, Code Clan, whether you're just off doing your own thing on Udemy as a self-taught developer, you think that you're going to be just doing non-stop coding and developing and it's all going to be amazing. It is. It's a really great career, but it's not always as simple and straightforward as that. So the idea is to think about just what you would actually do in the role. So just a brief introduction to myself. So as we said, I'm Peter Shalan. There's a picture of me looking wistfully into the distance from a felucca in Egypt, which hopefully everyone can see the slides okay. As the title says, I'm a software engineering senior manager now, but I was a career-long software developer. So I went a very kind of traditional route. So I did the first higher computing in Scotland. I went to university to study software engineering. I did a master's in what was then new object-oriented software engineering, and then went to work. So I started working as a professional developer in 1998. I know I can't possibly be as old as that, but I am, I promise. And I've been working in software development ever since. Most of my career was spent in some sort of full stack Java type of development. I spent about 20 years contracting, working for almost everyone who had a computer in Scotland. So quite a varied career. As Joanna said, I moved to Modular as a permanent member of staff, as a senior software developer, became a technical lead and became an engineering manager, which I still do. We could have another talk on what's an engineering manager, because that's a whole different kettle of fish depending on which company you're in. But basically, the idea would be that I would wrangle developers and also try and look after their interests towards the company as well. So enough about me, because that's very boring. So when I wanted to get into technology and get into software development, I did that because I thought that computers just seemed like the most amazing things in the world at the time. It was the kind of computer revolution in the UK. Everyone was starting to have a computer at home, play games, do amazing things, and technology just seemed amazing. So I thought, I'm going to have some of that, and I'm going to do that, and it's going to be amazing and really exciting. So I went to uni, did all the studying, studied different types of development, all very practical, all very hard skills, all very wonderful. And I came out of university raring to go, thinking, I'm going to write the bestest code ever written in the world. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be wonderful. And, raring to go. It wasn't quite like that when I got into the office. So according to the internet, this is roughly how a developer spends their time. And you can see here that the biggest box is 32%, writing new code or improving existing code. So yeah, it's a really big part of your job, but you're a developer. Why are you spending a third of your time doing development or writing new code? Because you will also spend nearly a quarter of your time in meetings, doing some form of management or administrative tasks, doing operational things like setting up environments, or maybe you'll be involved in a more DevOps team, so you'll be doing things there. Code maintenance, because everybody already has code. So sometimes you have to go and look at what's already there. You have to be able to understand it, improve it, just make it work, debug it. Developers are also testers. Very few companies now will have a very strict separation between development and testing. It used to be the case that you would throw something over the wall to QA after developing, QA being quality assurance or testing. That's definitely not going to happen in most places. At the very least, as a developer, you'll be writing unit tests for your code. So you'll be testing your own code. You may also be working in a team where you're expected to be what we like to call a T-shaped developer.
You should have been fucking putting that instead of calling that. Jeez.
So Brian, did you have a question, or are you not on mute? That answers that question. Okay, so yeah, testing, really important aspect. Security issues, that could be anything. It could be pen testing. It could be just keeping your environments up to date with patches, with software, with other types of things. So as well as those, I've put down some more specific bullet points. So yeah, design as well as coding. So you can't just basically sit down at PC and start typing in your language of choice. You have to know what you're doing. So you have to spend a lot of time designing. There will be admin tasks that you have to do. Brainstorming, collaboration, all those things where you're basically working as part of a team. You're not an individual. It's not hackers. You're not sitting there in a darkened room with pizza boxes being slid under the door, just coding away in your own little bubble. You have to work with other people. So you have to be able to play nicely with others. I think that the social aspect of developing is often really kind of misunderstood, especially if you've watched all these movies where people are just sitting in their basement with a dozen computers and monitors. There is waiting around sometimes. As you work on bigger code bases, you have to go through more elaborate build and release cycles. And as I mentioned before, you probably have to manage different environments. You have your own environment to look after. You may be responsible or involved in setting up different test environments at different levels. So there's all sorts of things that go on over and above just writing the code. So getting into a few of those, again, this is by no way going to be an exhaustive list. There's lots and lots of things. But what people quite often do, and even experienced developers, they very often just want to be They just want to get down to it. They want to be told exactly what the requirements are. They want to know exactly what it means when the requirement's fulfilled, and they just want to get down and code it. So I had a team, for example, in my last role, who were getting unhappy about the fact that we were constantly talking to business. We were constantly trying to understand what was going on, why we wanted to do the things we were going to do. And they were really fed up with it and said, right, I just want to start coding. Like, I'm fed up with this. And my answer to that was, okay, sit down then and start coding, start writing it. And they kind of pulled up a bit short and went, oh, okay, but what about this? And how are we going to address that? And what's going to happen here? And I was like, right, okay, so you're not ready. You don't actually know what you're doing. So we need to come back. So I'm calling this just understanding the why. Every interview that I would go on now, people will want to know that you want to understand why you're doing what you're doing, what business problem you're trying to solve, the fact that you're actually not doing this in a vacuum. You're doing this as part of a product or a service that's going to be offered to people, and why what you're doing is important. So to be able to do that successfully, you need to be able to speak the language of your stakeholder. So if you're working in the financial services industry and you were working in, I don't know, investment banking, you might need to develop an understanding of what certain financial products are. If you're working in the payments industry, you might need to understand what the bank's payment scheme is, or the faster payment scheme is, and how that works, and what people would use it for, and why it's important, and all this kind of stuff. And you also need to understand just a little, well, need to understand quite a lot actually about the business that you're working in, how it makes money, how it delivers, how it's seen to be successful, because your contribution to that success is going to be how you're measured. You are not going to be measured on the number of lines of code that you committed that week. There was a time when people were sometimes measured on lines of code, which led to some really funny practices of not writing a loop if you could copy and paste the code 10 times and all sorts of crazy things. But thankfully, we're not back in those days. So yeah, speaking the language of your stakeholders and understanding the business that you're involved in. That helps you build the right things, because I'm sure we've seen these diagrams before where two people are building a river crossing, and they both start with the same spec, but one person starts building a bridge, one person starts building a tunnel, and they get halfway and they're nowhere near anything else. And it genuinely is quite common for someone to, work through a specification. Everyone says they understand what's going on. You develop it, you go the whole way through, you think you're finished, big tick, job's a good one, and you show it to the customer, and the customer just goes, what is that? Like, that is not what I wanted whatsoever. So yeah, really important to build the right things. And again, understanding the problem that you're trying to solve. So very much related to what I've been talking about already. If you don't know what you're trying to do, you won't do it. So it's really important to have, I guess, a curious mind about a lot of these things. Ask a lot of questions. Don't be, the whole, there's no such thing as a stupid question. People always think that there is such a thing as a stupid question when it comes to themselves, and they don't want to ask things. But you almost always are asking something that somebody else wanted to know as well, but they were too embarrassed to ask. And it's always better to be clear. Quite a lot of development has probably died on the hill of assumptions and just saying, oh yeah, I'm sure this is what is supposed to happen, and it's not at all. So always understand what problem you're trying to solve. And then the last thing that I've put down here, again, not an exhaustive list, is prioritization and being involved in some of those topics. Because as a team, you are going to have a lot of different demands on your time and your resources. That could be on your time as a group of developers, because people want so many different products and so many different things. So you'll definitely be involved in prioritization from that perspective. But there'll also be things like, well, we need to address some technical depth in our code base, but we also need to get this new product out the door. How are we going to figure out what we're going to do, when? And that's really crucial. And it's not all just done by the product person. Everybody in the team needs to be involved and needs to buy into that one. So I've given a whole slide to something which is modeling. So again, you may have done this as part of your coursework. It may or may not have been very extensive, depending on the size of the projects that you're involved in. But just like a builder wouldn't go to an empty field and just unload some bricks and start flinging up a house, they would refer to architect's plans, they would refer to blueprints, they would refer to all sorts of stuff. For people within the software development industry, modeling is a really crucial skill. So this is obviously just an example of a model, something that's, I don't know, is it complicated? There's a lot of arrows flying around, which always makes it look kind of complicated. It's not really that complicated at all. It's just a few services with some sub topics flying around, information being passed around, being stored in databases, or being sent out by email or whatever. And obviously we've got different levels of modeling. So we can think about, for example, domain modeling. So that helps us understand the information that's involved. We can think about modeling from a more architectural sense of how we're actually going to deploy our code, our product, so that it scales, so that it's reliable, so that it's not going to fall down, all sorts of stuff. But you'll end up spending a lot of time in basically some kind of whiteboarding tool. One of the more common ones being Miro, for example, where you'll basically be designing systems and using those designs as an exercise to try and drive out questions. These kind of things can be done independently, but they're quite often done as a group. So again, there's a real social aspect to that. I don't think I can overemphasize, and maybe it's just because it was my imagination when I got into software development. But software development, this image of a software developer as being somebody who's just sitting on their own, who doesn't like other people, who can't communicate very well, who sits there in some sort of strange isolation bubble, is definitely not what's going to happen when you actually start your job. You're going to be working in a team, most probably an agile team, and we'll come on to that. So yeah, I think modeling is a really good skill to have. So get familiar with whatever modeling tool that you're going to be using. If it's something like Miro, there's so many resources. I think there's even a Miroverse and a YouTube channel and all sorts of stuff on how to do various different things in Miro. It might not be Miro though, it could be anything, but definitely spend some time going off and learning how to do that and how to talk about and communicate what it is that you're looking through. And if you're involved in a modeling exercise, don't turn off your camera and let the senior guys or the senior people just walk through this. Like, ask questions. This is like a really good opportunity to learn why different things are happening as well. So yeah, modeling, because essentially every developer is a modeler, because we're just modeling some version of the world and translating it into a computer program. The modeling part as well tends to be, I mean, this picture, because it involves Kafka topics and things, is slightly tech specific, but a lot of it is a really transferable skill, because you're just talking, it doesn't matter what language effectively this is. You can see here, we're talking about services, we're talking about databases, but we don't mention languages, we don't mention frameworks, we don't mention anything in particular. So it's a really good general transferable skill. Let's go down. So I mentioned working in a team. You'll spend a lot of your time working in a team. So there are different aspects, obviously, of teamwork. There'll be team processes. So you might decide that your team's going to adopt a particular methodology. So, for example, mentioned already the Agile, or and there are various frameworks within Agile. The most popular probably being Scrum, also Kanban. So knowing what those are and what they involve and the reasons why they're being used can be really important. So, for example, if you take Scrum, somebody might just think, I don't know, that ceremonies are annoying and they just take up time, and they'd rather be not having that meeting. They'd rather be off coding or getting some, quotes, real work done. But if you understand Scrum and Agile and what you're doing and why, you can quite often find that the reason behind a lot of these things is because just being off on your own doing things doesn't really work, and it tries to put some structure into that kind of social aspect of software development, and allows people to be accountable for what they're doing and collaborative, and there's all sorts of really good reasons why. One of the most overlooked things, for example, in Scrum can be sprint review, where people don't want to come along at the end of 2 weeks and give a demo of what they've been doing and show it to other people in the team or company, or show it to stakeholders. Maybe they are a little bit embarrassed, maybe they think it doesn't add any value, but actually demonstrating what you've delivered in those increments holds people accountable. It lets people give early feedback if there's anything wrong. There's all sorts of things that it's really good for. As well as that, quite often a team will want to define its ways of working. So it's really common to have some sort of team charter, for example, that just says what kind of team you want to be, how you're going to work together, defining what kind of behaviour is acceptable, unacceptable, what kind of methodologies you're prepared to consider, and just generally how you're going to get along with each other. And that sort of brings it on to people. So as I said before, it's definitely not an isolated activity. You will be working in teams, and you'll be working with people, and if everything goes really well, everyone you work with is going to be amazing. They're going to be lovely. You're never going to have a crossword, and everything's going to be wonderful. In reality, people are going to have different personalities. People are going to have different opinions. Some people are going to think that you should be doing things in this way. and someone's going to think you should be doing it in another way, and you're both going to be incredibly convinced that your way is the right way. So you're going to have conflicts, and you're going to have like interpersonal issues. You have to learn, basically, as I said before, how to play nice. So it can be really important to learn the softer side of the skill set. So, for example, communication, absolutely key, and like how to communicate and how to influence and how to bring people on a journey with you is really important, because if you want to get your ideas adopted, it's important to be able to convince people, rather than you're not going to necessarily be in a position where you can impose, and even if you can, it's usually a pretty bad idea. It's much better to get buy-in from groups of people. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was career development, which, when you're at the beginning, is sometimes a little bit more straightforward. You need to know certain languages, you need to know certain frameworks that you're going to be developing in. You need to know what we would call the hard skills. So if I'm going to be working in a Java development team, I need to know Java. If I'm going to be doing Spring microservices, I need to know the Spring framework. And those things are really straightforward generally. You know what your company does, you know what technologies it's using, you can find courses or you can go and learn in it, and it's all groovy. But what is often A, overlooked, and B, often people just don't want to, is learning the kind of softer skills. So we're talking about communication already, and how crucial that is. Creativity, obviously people would say, oh, can you learn creativity? But maybe that's debatable, but you can learn how to collaborate. You can learn about different things like liberating structures, like how to include different people's ideas, how to be consciously inclusive so that everyone gets to bring ideas to the table, and it's not just key individuals who are always having their voices heard. And I've put down emotional intelligence because I think there are a lot of very smart people in technology, and we all know that, like, I say we all know, there are different types of intelligence. Again, if you want to be effective at working with others, emotional intelligence and being able to adjust and work with people of different personality types, things like that can be really important. There's a load of other things that you could go into here. There's things like, so for example, almost every software development team that I've ever worked on is going to be using some system like Jira to open tickets for user stories and have boards where you're going to move those tickets through boards, and you're going to talk about how they move and when and all sorts of stuff. And it's really important to know how to use your process and how to keep everything kind of tidy, how to make sure everybody can pick things up if you're not there, and like all sorts of different things. But I don't want to get too involved in everything, and I wanted it to be a discussion topic so that people can genuinely ask questions, especially if you've just finished a course or you're thinking about what your first job is going to be like. It was a long time since I did my very first job, but I do remember it pretty well. So yeah, I'd like to open it up a little bit and just ask if there's anything that people would like to ask about on their, now that they're starting their journey.
Oh, thank you, Peter, by the way.
You're very welcome. I am just going to open the chat as well in case there's anything in the chat box.
I think we've got Taylor with a hand up. I don't know if you want to stop
Hi there,
sharing and
Peter.
you can see people. It might be a bit easier.
I will do that.
Will I start? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Hi, Taylor.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for your time this afternoon. That was a good chat. My question is, I'm a recent graduate from CodeClan, and obviously I've just done the 16-week immersive course, and it was just so full on, and we're learning every day, and you'll get your homework every day, and now I've just graduated. I'm kind of in the limbo between I've just graduated and I'm waiting on trying to get a job. Do you have any advice of what to do in the meantime, like for like self-learning?
Well, I mean, I suppose it depends what kind of job, or I mean, there's a huge world out there, right? As you know, and there's so many different things that you could look at. The modeling type of work, I would say, is pretty good, of like getting familiar with those kinds of tools and just being able to design and communicate and be able to kind of understand what those things are. There's lots of resources for that. As I was saying before, Miro lets you have, I think, when it's free, you can have like an infinite board. So you're never going to run out effectively. It's just a board that you can constantly scroll and like try new things and do new things. Tools like that are really good. I would also say as well, one of the things that is pretty useful is going to a lot of the meetup groups that are around. There's a really good one, or there's a couple of really good ones I know that are based around Edinburgh, things around the future of work and agile and all sorts of stuff like that. And there's like topic specific ones as well. And they let you learn a little bit more about working in different ways, or but they also let you kind of meet new people, because there are, now that we're kind of post-COVID, there's a lot of them taking place in person again. You can go along, you can network, you can meet people, you can do all sorts of stuff. Beyond that, I think just thinking about these kind of
you're going to say the tech army, aren't you, Peter, at some point?
Softer skills. Yeah, that is the other like really good thing to do. I mean, I know CodeClan isn't like this, and you do a lot of practical work, and that's great. But
I think that's where I'm kind of struggling at the minute, coming from such a practical, intensive course, and now it's kind of I'm left to my own devices. I'm kind of like, okay, it's quite hard to kind of get into that groove.
So I know a lot of people have gone through STA from CodeClan and from other places, from self-learning. I think nothing beats actually getting on a project and starting to do some practical work and seeing how it fits in with your expectations. Obviously, STA is, apart from being great, it does have its differences with office work, because it's a little bit more disjointed and you're not necessarily seeing people all the time. But it's really good to kind of get practical experience of doing all these things as well. So yeah, I would get involved in a project, and even observing or coming along. But the more involved you can get is great, obviously.
I'm going to echo a couple of the points Peter said there. So Taylor, with something like that, you probably don't have a network of people who are in the industry, possibly as well. So the STA can kind of almost tick one box there with meeting people who are already further along the curve or already working in development roles, so that if you are kind of going, am I really this or that, you can talk to people. But equally, the meetups that Peter said are other ways of doing exactly that. So networking is vital in any career you have, basically. And, you know, the worst thing that can happen is you meet somebody working at the company you'd like to work at, and you talk to them before you have the interview, and you're much more ready about how they interview and what they ask in that role, basically. You know, and if you get that, that'll be brilliant. I would echo, you know, we can give you exposure to tools and examples of stuff in the STA, but it isn't the same as working 9 to 5, because you don't need to find time to work when you're working 9 to 5. You're just expected to do it. So it is different, you know, and even subtleties like most companies have a standard platform. Most of them say go and test stuff so you get familiar with the existing code. A lot of the projects we do are greenfield rather than kind of, you know, fixing existing products. But there are other bits of sitting in front of a mirror for yourself and kind of going, right, do I want to work in a startup? Do I want to work in a small company? Am I happy to be a small cog in a big machine? Because that you prepare differently for all of those roles. The bit that Peter was saying around understanding what it is you're doing is fundamental to any bit of tech. And sadly, nobody will pay you for just writing code. It's got to have a reason why.
Yeah, that's true. I'm just looking at the chat window for questions as well, so I'm maybe going to alternate so I can see your hand up, Ross. I'll come back to you in a second, I promise. I can see Magda asking about how to tackle context switching and knowing which meetings bring value. Context switching is always hard because every time you make a switch, you're obviously having to sort of deload your brain from one thing and bring it back to something else. There's lots of different approaches that you can have to that. Some people will think about when they're most productive and try and maybe block out time for particular tasks at particular times of the day. So you might try and block out like development time, coding time at a point when you feel that you're the most productive, but you know that obviously has to fit in with team meetings. But I would basically say the more you can minimize it, the better. But you're always going to have to do it. So you need to try and think of maybe trying to group things that are more similar into particular parts of the day. Maybe try and get some of the administrative stuff done earlier and just get it out of the way because you're not going to want to do it later. So, for example, I've seen teams have issues where nobody wants to necessarily do code review. So we had something where everybody would try and start their day with a code review, and then it unblocked other people. It got an administrative task out of the way and done, and it made sure that everything was flowing and nobody kind of left it to see if someone else would pick up. So there's like different things like that you can do. In terms of the meetings, I've started to get a bit militant with meetings. So for example, if someone drops a random meeting into my calendar, this might be difficult, by the way, a little bit earlier in your career. But someone drops a random meeting into my calendar and there's no agenda and there's no information about what this meeting's for, what's going to happen. I will sometimes just reject that out of hand and just say, like, come back to me with an agenda, because then I can see what's there and if I really need to be there. So I think as well, if a meeting isn't bringing any value and you're working, say, in an agile way, it's important to kind of bring that up in retrospectives and think about, like, what are we actually trying to achieve here and get everybody to understand. So I think it's good to always communicate and basically ask questions and try and figure out if you're actually doing anything with any real purpose. But I can tell you right now that every single person is going to complain that they have too many meetings all through their career. You will always have too many meetings. You will always feel like you have too many meetings. And if you go down the engineering manager route, you'll find that your working day just turns into basically a big long string of meetings. Ross, sorry, you've had your hand up really patiently there for ages.
That's all right. Thank you. Yeah, I've actually graduated from Code Clan as well, similar to Taylor, and have joined up with STA as recommended by Tony. And like you said, kind of getting in on projects is the best way to kind of stay active. And we've been told to kind of keep our GitHub active as well. It was just kind of what advice would you have to also, as like a career changer who hasn't worked in tech and is now transitioning into tech, to contribute towards kind of like open source within our capabilities. I'm going not to knowing anything about code to, you know, building React Native apps and back-end REST APIs and stuff is completely crazy after 16 weeks. So yeah, it's just what advice you would give to us to kind of contribute to these projects.
I mean, I suppose on one hand, the advice is you're absolutely right, contribute to those projects. But in terms of being a little bit more specific, there's this analogy that if you want to learn something, say for example, be the worst player in the band. So sometimes maybe when you're quite new, you feel like you don't know enough, or you're not gonna be able to contribute as much as other people with like years of experience or whatever. But there's a lot to be said for being the worst player in the band, and you find that people do learn like a lot faster when they've got other people who are kind of giving them examples and maybe prepared to mentor a little bit. And usually a lot of open source projects will have people who are quite keen to help somebody come along. I know, for example, in the projects that I've been involved, again, this is slightly separate, but in the STA, there's always been a lot of people who are prepared to, you know, pick up tickets with somebody and kind of pair program and do different things and bring them along. And it's a really good approach. A lot of the time with open source projects as well, you might see, I don't know, like bug lists, for example. So you don't necessarily have to go in and do something completely from scratch. You can try and pick up something that looks like it's just a little, like a niggly issue, or ask someone involved in the project. Like if there's an issue like that nobody's kind of got around to picking up, but is maybe seen as a smaller piece of work. There's like different approaches you can take, but I think getting involved in something like that and doing something practical, it's definitely a practical skill. So you do want to keep doing it. You don't want to put it away. And like I would also as well think about that this can be a little bit more difficult. But I remember someone who was a self-taught developer once said to me, you know, you go away and you do the tutorial, and so you follow it through, and then you're done. And then if somebody says to you, right, now do your own project, you're just like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even know how to start. So I would say as well, if there are things that you've been learning, and you've been learning from tutorials, or you've been learning from something like that, try and think of an application and then go and build it, so that you're not just, you can understand the tutorial and then you come to do it and you don't really understand. So I would always recommend like going off and doing your own thing as well, just to kind of cement what you don't know as well. So I'm looking back at the chats as well. So there's a question from Yana about there being so many different areas and roles in tech, and being overwhelmed and finding it hard to pick a sort of interesting and realistic direction. And what advice you would give someone who feels like a jack of all trades and master of none? This depends on what you want to do. So, for example, when you work in smaller companies, quite often they need a jack of all trades because there isn't someone dedicated to doing every particular thing. So you need somebody who is prepared to go over and do a bit of this and do a bit of that. And they might not know everything in depth, but they know a lot of different things. Obviously, some of it depends on your own interests as well. If you want to be a Java developer, there's no point going off and learning Ruby necessarily as a first point of call. Quite often, when you're getting started and you get your first role, as I said, small companies can be good because you get exposure to a little bit of everything. Large companies quite often offer graduate schemes that will take you into different parts of the business and give you like different types of exposure. So you can figure out what it is that interests you and what you like. But yeah, there's lots of different ways that you can approach something like that. Again, get involved in a real project. Get involved in actually developing something and see what interests you. Quite often people will develop, say, something that they know more in depth, but they also have these other skills on the side. Again, that concept of being a T-shaped developer. So you might have a specialism, but you've also got some generalization stuff. What you choose, though, I guess very much depends on what the role is that you're going to look to fill. So that's maybe a little bit vague, but it's hard to be a lot more specific without knowing exactly what you'd like to do. Magda, hello.
I actually wanted to elaborate on what you were just saying, Peter. So in the team I'm working on right now, it's a front-end team, but we're working in Angular, and we recently had a React engineer join us, and he couldn't find his way with Angular. It wasn't really sitting with him very well. And he started helping us out on the DevOps side of things, which was extremely helpful. Like the whole team benefited from this. And although this was not something where he wanted to stay in for the rest of his career, and since then he has left the team, but he actually was very helpful. And I think the concept of being a T-shaped engineer is really, really helpful, and a good way of seeing yourself, or maybe like planning your career. It's good to have knowledge in different parts, because there will be times when you have to support teams in places where, in certain parts where, where maybe it's not your strength, but having some knowledge is better than none. I think as well, from my experience, and I'm not even a developer, I'm a Scrum Master, I've noticed that many new developers do not do a lot of testing, or are not used to being asked to do their own tests, writing their own tests, and then helping with tests. And I would definitely say, if this is not something you've been doing before, and you can learn those skills and kind of get more familiar with that, I would encourage you to do this. It is a really useful skill. And if you're looking for a job, kind of advertising the fact that you can do that can really help you out.
Yeah. Sorry, just for some reason that kind of reminded me. I think it was more from what we were talking about earlier, but around networking and meetups and different things like that. I think all of those provide really good opportunities. And I'm sure wherever you are, there's like different meetups in your area, or online meetups and different things like that. But another really good resource, which probably everyone's already using, is LinkedIn as well. I know, for example, when I mentioned at the top of the talk that I was all set to start a job, and basically a day before I was due to start, the role fell through. And when I was on LinkedIn, the network that I had built up there, including people actually that weren't even in my network and I didn't know, so many people were all over that and sending me, leads and looking to help. And it's actually a really, really nice community. So getting involved in these communities and being quite active in them can be really helpful as well. I'm not sure there was anything else on the chat window that was maybe. Oh no, well there is
one more hand up. Alexi had a hand up.
Is there?
Yeah, Alexi, do you still have a question? No, cool.
Okay, so someone has asked about peer review. Talking to somebody who doesn't do peer review at their workplace, and is it useful, and how do you do it well? That's a whole topic on its own. The answer is, or the high level answer is, you will be hard pushed, I think, if you work at a company of any kind of size, to find somewhere that doesn't do peer review of code. If you work in any kind of regulated industry, I think it's actually mandatory that someone else has looked over code, because you can't commit into mainline branches of code unless it's had multiple eyes on it, because you could be siphoning 0.001 pennies off into your private Bermudan bank account. So there's all sorts of reasons why peer review is a good thing. But also, peer review is a really good learning opportunity. It's a good chance for you to look at someone else's code and see how someone else has approached doing something and how they've approached testing. We've all had those coding moments as well, where we just sit down and we crank something out and it works. But maybe there's a better way or a slightly different way that we could do it, or maybe it doesn't quite conform with the standards that we've agreed as a team. So I would always say that you should be reviewing code. Things like code review and sprint review and kind of sharing and being very public about what you've done can feel quite unnatural at first, and it can feel like you don't really want the scrutiny. But I find that the more open you can be about that, and the more receptive you can be to that kind of feedback, and the more you can take part in giving that kind of feedback, just improves everyone. It improves the quality of what you're delivering. It improves you as an individual, because you can learn and you can get feedback and you can improve, and it gives you the opportunity to provide that help to somebody else as well. So there's all sorts of reasons why reviewing code is a really good thing. Magda.
I have one more thing I wanted to add. I would say if you're already on the project with STA, then try everything. Try your hand at writing code, at reviewing, at testing, at spike tickets, which I don't know if many people know what the spike tickets are. I didn't know. These are the tickets where you're exploring an idea that doesn't necessarily need to go somewhere. It might be changed. It might be a completely dead end, but it helps your mind stay nimble. And this is something that, again, in your sort of 9 to 5 will be happening on a very regular basis. But it kind of also, I think this is what Taylor was asking, like, how do you kind of stay engaged and like still, stay with it? It is really good to explore those ideas and kind of raise your hand anytime somebody asks, like, okay, we need a volunteer to do something. Then what's the worst that can happen? You're going to learn something. That's the worst that's going to happen. And I think it is a very valuable skill, and it is something that, you know, from my experience when interviewing people, that is something that really counts for a lot. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think this openness to trying things and to have a curiosity and a really open mindset to going and giving things a go is really important. I think especially, well, no, I was going to say especially when you're starting out, but no, I don't. I'm going to remove that quantifier, but I think it's definitely something, you know, when the less you know, the more you are going to have to say things like, well, I don't know that, but I would really love to find out. And I'd be, you know, and you want to demonstrate how you might go about approaching that as a task if you don't know something. And, you know, as opposed to, you know, oh no, I've never done that before. And then, you know, the answer stops there. You know, if you're saying, well, no, I've never done that before, but it sounds really interesting, and you know, I could ask a little bit more about that, and maybe this is how I would go about getting into that, and things. You can just show that you're keen and that you're interested and that you've got the type of mindset that people are looking for.
I'm going to stop recording now.